Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Katzenmeyer, and on behalf of the Columbus Metropolitan Club Board of Trustees, it's great to see everyone on this cold 12-degree day. So today is the first forum of 2015, and it marks the 16th installment of Dr. Bill Lafayette's Blue Chip Economic Forecast. That's remarkable, Bill. So please help me thank sponsors, Fifth Third Bank, BDO, the Columbus Dispatch, and our partner, Leadership Columbus, for their support and participation today. And please help me welcome Paul Weber, Senior VP of Fifth Third Private Bank, to introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Fifth Third Bank is pleased to support the mission of the Columbus Metropolitan Club to engage week after week the people, the ideas, and the conversations that are important to the vitality of our community. Today we have the honor of welcoming two uniquely qualified individuals to the CMAC stage to discuss indicators of the health of the economy in our region and in our state and beyond. Mark Williams of the Columbus Dispatch will host the interview portion today, but first to the podium to provide his well-informed and highly regarded predictions and history of the economics of our region. Let's welcome the owner of Regionomics and well-known numbers guy around town, Bill Lafayette.
Well, Happy New Year, and thank you all for coming. My thanks to CMC for having me back for a 14th year. Thanks also to Fifth Third, BDO, the Dispatch, and my friends at Leadership Columbus for their support of the forum this year. Well, folks, this is just about a first in all those 14 years, a downright cheerful economic speech. I started showing up here during the jobless recovery following the 2001 recession and 9/11. The topic for that forum was planning for uncertain times or something like that. Not cheerful. Then employment growth started nationally. Here, not so much. Our retail sector melted down over the 2000s, and most other sectors underperformed. As a result, overall employment growth in Columbus during the expansion was 40% slower than the national average, and I had to say so year after year after year. And that, believe me, was not fun either for me or for you. We all know what happened next. But while the recession hit us hard and cost us almost 48,000 jobs, that was about 20% less than the national average. My job then was to speak as soothingly as I possibly could and assure you all that it would indeed get better. And indeed it has. Since employment growth started at the beginning of 2010, U.S. employment has grown by 8%, while ours has apparently grown by 9.7%, and almost certainly more than that. Back to that point in a little bit. The U.S. economy finally recovered all of its recession losses this past May, a feat that we accomplished in March 2012. You have to go back to the 1990s to see an expansion that was this favorable for us here in Columbus. The national economy is actually looking pretty good in 2015. Firing on all cylinders is how the Wall Street Journal put it last week. Two surveys that I like to follow, the Journal's Economic Forecasting Survey and the Philadelphia Federal Reserve's Survey of Professional Forecasters, are both calling for GDP growth of close to 3% this year. That's a solid growth rate that won't lead to overheating. The Philadelphia Fed survey says that the risk of a down quarter this year is very low. So we probably won't see a repeat of last year's revolting first quarter unless the polar vortex returns. Let us hope not. The spectacular growth that we saw in the second and third quarters was really making up for that loss. Economists are looking for things to tame down a bit in 2015, but still remain strong. The Thomson Reuters University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index just hit an 8-year high. Industrial production measures are moderating, but still solidly in expansion territory. U.S. employment growth is expected to be around 2% this year, a little better than the 1.8% employment growth that we saw last year. Low gas prices are a huge boon. If they stay low, that's going to provide the average household with an extra $750 this year. What happens to that $750 depends on whether people expect gas prices to continue to stay low. If so, they'll spend it. If not, they'll save it. That's a bit of a double-edged sword for us here in Central Ohio, though. If low gas prices cause the oil and gas activity in eastern Ohio to dry up, that's going to reduce state tax revenues, which help to sustain state government employment here. And it also might make us forget that driving a lot dirties our air, runs us afoul of the EPA, and makes people sick. One rain cloud in all of this is overseas economies, which are generally pretty weak. That hurts our exports both directly because of less demand and by a strengthening dollar that makes U.S. goods more expensive overseas. The general feeling among economists, though, is that the U.S. economy is strong enough to handle both this and the impacts of the Federal Reserve's unwinding of the ultra-easy money policies of the last half dozen years. Given all this, my forecast is for a net increase of 21,000 jobs in Central Ohio in 2015, or 2.1%. If that happens, this is going to be the year that Central Ohio employment breaks 1 million, both because of growing employment and because the government will finally start reporting stats on the new and improved 10-county metro area that came along 2 years ago. That alone will add about 12,000 to the monthly employment numbers. But if you look at the numbers that we have now for 2014 employment, you have every right in the world to wonder whether my holidays were just a trifle too cheery. They show an increase of 0.7% in employment in Central Ohio in 2014. Nowhere near 2.1%, nowhere near last year's national average, and less even than Ohio's 0.8%. This spotlights a problem that I talk about every year. The numbers that I work with to track Central Ohio employment and to develop my forecast are tentative and get revised the following March. Lately, those revisions, corrections really, have been getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and usually to the good for Central Ohio. The tentative employment numbers are showing Central Ohio employment essentially stalling out over the last year and a half. Between June and September, they showed a net decline of 7,300 jobs. I didn't believe that then, and I don't believe it now. As these errors have gotten increasingly serious, I've started to make my forecast taking into account both the numbers themselves and which of them are likely to get revised and by how much. Not to get too technical on you, but this year I did that much more formally than I have in the past. If my analysis is right, Central Ohio employment grew not 0.7% in 2014, but something like 1.8 or 1.9%. That gives us growth last year matching the national average. And by the way, it means that my 2014 forecast was dead on. Not bragging, just saying. The real way to look at this forecast that you have in front of you is not what the numbers will suggest when I'm standing here a year from now, but what the numbers will show when they get revised in March 2016 and to some extent again in March 2017. So in other words, what will really be going on this coming year. And if I'm right, it's going to be a very good year for us. Let me turn now, though, to a bigger question, as I try to do every year. As I said earlier, we recovered the last of our recession job losses almost 3 years ago now. But I've always wondered how the jobs we got compare to the jobs that we lost. Now, I've taken a quick initial stab at answering that question by looking at employment in Central Ohio by occupation, what you do regardless of where you work. In May 2007 and again in May 2013. Some of this work gives an inkling of why the Central Ohio poverty rate is so stubbornly high, even though we have all this job growth. Total May 2013 employment by this measure was 941,000. That's 20,000 more, 2.2% more than it was in May 2007. Meanwhile, the U.S. employment was down 1.3% from 2007. And as you look at these numbers, there are clear winners and losers. The biggest winner was management occupations. There were 11,000 more managers of all types in Central Ohio in 2013 than there were in 2007. That's a gain of 30% compared to a nationwide gain of 9%. It's also more than half the total gain. Before the recession, we had 10% fewer workers in management jobs than you would expect in an economy this size. Now we have 3% more. There are 9,500 more healthcare practitioners than there were, and healthcare support occupations, aides, orderlies, technicians, and the like, are up 4,300. Growth in both these groups is way ahead of the national average. Education-related workers are up 7,400. Local growth was 15%. National growth was 1%. The biggest loser was construction. Those jobs were off 7,000 or 22%. Meanwhile, though, the national loss was 24%. Sales, office support, maintenance and repair, production, and transportation jobs were also losers, off 4,000 to 5,000 each. Another perspective that you can get from looking at these numbers is the change in the amount of training, education, and experience people are expected to have as a requirement to get hired. Here's where the poverty insights come in. The number of jobs requiring a degree increased by 33,000, while those requiring no degree decreased by 15,000. The average wage of a non-degree job was $32,700, down 5.6% after inflation. The average wage of a degree job was $76,000, which after inflation was unchanged. So lower skilled jobs in Central Ohio pay less now than they did before the recession, and there are fewer of them. That certainly helps explain our poverty problem. It also helps explain why the 2013 employment rate in Franklin County for people without a high school diploma was 15.6% versus 7.1% for high school graduates and 3.1% for people with a bachelor's degree. There is a whole lot more work that can be done with these numbers, but at least this is a start, and they suggest that that additional work might well be worth doing. So thanks for listening. Best wishes to all of you and all of our viewers out there in television land for a happy and successful 2015. Thanks a lot. As I get myself mic'd up here, high as I can.
As high as you can. Following instructions.
I'm always compliant.
I too like to say Happy New Year to everybody. It's good to see everybody again this year, and my thanks to the CMC and Bill for allowing me to be a part of his annual forecast. This to me is a lot of fun, and I always look forward to it. But I do have to say I had a nightmare last night, Bill, about this thing. I showed up at the event wearing pajamas, a T-shirt, and slippers.
This is a very forgiving crowd.
Yeah. Well, and then on top of that, I lost my notes. So the event hadn't started yet, and I'm frantically looking for my notes, and I finally go to the front of the room and I yell, "Has anybody seen my notes?"
Fortunately,
I got them. I got my notes here, and I'm dressed appropriately, so I'm already feeling better. So let's get into it. Pretty strong forecast. Let's get into talking a little bit about some of the areas, some of the sectors where you're seeing really good growth for 2015, and some where things are not quite so great.
Okay. Fortunately, we don't have any serious problem children, really, other than in comparison to the national average, in contrast to earlier forecasts. So, by far, though, the best sector is business and professional services, which has 17% of the jobs in Central Ohio, but it's going to give us 25% of the net gain that I'm expecting. 7,600 jobs, or 4.7%. And that, by the way, is one of the sectors that the Bureau of Labor Statistics probably got very, very wrong in their preliminary estimates. Healthcare is also going to be very good, 4,400 jobs, 3.6%. The sectors that are going to be less good include transportation. I'm predicting a gain there of 700 jobs, 1.4%. But this is a sector that's been really disappointing ever since the recovery began, especially because it's so crucial to this economy, and it did so very well before the recession.
Talk a little bit about that sector in terms of what that whole sector kind of covers.
Well, that sector covers moving people, moving goods, which is a very, very important part of that sector here, and it includes some warehousing, not all. And so we've been a powerhouse for distribution now for the last 15 or 20 years. We had a gain of 40% before the recession. That's one of the few sectors in the last decade that really did well. Now it's not doing so well. And I think part of it is simply due to the fact that competition stiffened. So we've got a very good game in attracting transportation distribution companies, and we've got to stay on top of that game.
So you're talking about competition from other metro areas?
Other metro areas, other states, other parts of the country, sure.
I wanted to go into your outlook a little bit more on the professional and business services sector, because I know that this has been such a big deal, and for the coming year as well. This, to me, is one of the more intriguing sectors of employment because it's got all these really high, important jobs, skilled like architects and accountants and lawyers, but it also has that category of temporary workers that when we look at the economy and the recovery and some people coming under attack or criticism, kind of pointing to, oh, yeah, we had job gains last month, but they were a lot of these temporary jobs. They don't pay much. What's that really mean? How do you kind of what's your gauge and how you kind of look over that sector?
Well, I think the one thing that sector really has in common, all those different industries, is that those industries help other businesses in all sectors do their job. Employment in that sector as a whole has been higher than average for at least the last 25 years. So this is a sector that exports services outside the region and helps bring dollars into the region, making us all here in Central Ohio better off. But you're very correct. It is kind of a Frankenstein sector. It includes all sorts of different stuff. And when I look at it, what I like to do is look at its component parts. The professional and technical services, which is actually about 3 different things kind of smushed together. Corporate administration, and then the administrative support and waste services, which, so you've got one sector that includes both attorneys and accountants and trash collectors. So
Yeah. Well, this is also, yeah. What do you do about that? This is also the sector, though, where if you get companies, for example, that may outsource payroll or janitorial work, that's that kind of thing. So you may have maybe a manufacturer or a small manufacturer, maybe they have reduced staff, but they actually maybe it hasn't really reduced staff. Maybe it's kind of just moved to another company that now is specializing in that, so that the manufacturer doesn't have to worry about that stuff anymore. They can just focus on doing their thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so they focus on their core competency. You don't necessarily need an economist on staff, but you can certainly hire an economist. So economists and trash collectors all in the same sector.
What about economists to collect trash?
There are some of those.
Healthcare continuing to be on fire.
Yeah.
Can this go on forever, or will this have to slow down at some point?
Yes, it will have to slow down. And actually, for those of you who've been here year after year, you've heard me say time and time and time again, this is a sector that at some point is going to slow down. And the reason for that is that there's increasing demand for health services, and we're getting more and more people into Central Ohio hospitals from outside the region. That helps encourage job growth. But the thing you have to remember is that a lot of that sector are what we call local jobs, doctors who see patients from the local area in their local office. And so that part of the sector can really only grow as fast as population as a whole, including the increasing creakiness of us aging baby boomers. But at some point, that's got to slow down.
Okay, so that's something to watch.
I've been watching.
So
and one day it's going to happen.
So at some point, then that sounds kind of frightening, that since it's such a big part of our economy now, that we'll have to look someplace else to start to try to to continue to grow jobs.
Well, I don't see a collapse in that sector the way that retail collapsed 15 years ago. We're not going to see a collapse. We'll just see a slowdown in growth, and we'll have to think carefully about what other sectors we can encourage to help take up that slack if we're going to continue to grow well.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of poverty in your remarks. This is something I hear about periodically in the office when I'm talking to other reporters and editors, and it typically comes up at the moment when I'm bringing up, oh, geez, you guys should have seen the unemployment rate for Central Ohio last month. And so it typically goes like this. If our unemployment rate is so low and we have all this job growth, why is our poverty rate so high? And so a couple of our reporters just did a great series. I would talking about the healthcare, the home healthcare industry, and a big focus of the articles that they did was on how little money a lot of these people make who travel to people's homes and take care of the sick and disabled. And it kind of made me wonder, though, is there something more we should be doing when it comes to poverty in helping move that group up, or is this fall exclusively on the back of the worker to try to bring themselves up?
It most certainly does not. They need support. And I'm a part of the United Way's Financial Stability Results Committee, and that's one of the big topics that we talk about. Actually, it is the big topic that we talk about in that committee. In order to address the poverty problem, we really have to start by addressing personal challenges first. Things like financial literacy. What do you do with the money that you're suddenly earning? Living situations that might be difficult. Transportation needs, childcare needs, stuff like that. We need to provide affordable, accessible job training that includes both technical skills and soft skills. We were talking about that the other day, that those are just as important, if not more important, than technical skills. And we need to key that training to the focus industries for economic development, which there is a growing understanding of the importance of that. Then you need to support people as they adjust to employment. And a major problem in all this that we've been looking at over the last year or so that a lot of people don't really think about is what are called benefits cliffs. And a benefits cliff occurs when, as your wage increases, you are no longer eligible for certain benefits that you were eligible for. So your wage may increase 10 cents an hour, and all of a sudden you lose $500 worth of child care. And so it is an economically rational decision for you not to get in a position where you're making 10 cents more per hour. And so we don't know how to answer those problems, but we know that they definitely exist.
Yeah, we heard this regularly a couple years ago during holiday hiring season, where people that were collecting unemployment benefits, collecting those benefits versus taking a temporary job in a warehouse, making probably decisions that it just wasn't worth their while to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's economically rational, at least in the short term.
Sure. Let's get back to talking about the unemployment rate for Central Ohio. 3.7% in November. 3.7%. Unbelievable. Lowest rate since 2001. Here's my question for you, Bill. Can it get any lower? And if it does, at what point does it become a problem?
Yes, it can get lower, and at some point it will indeed become a problem. To some degree, it may already be a bit of a problem. Back in 1998, the average unemployment rate for Central Ohio was 2.8%. In 1999, it was 2.7%. Both those rates, by the way, were about 1.5 points below the national average. What that led to was high worker costs, high hiring costs, the inability to find and retain good workers, which in turn hurt productivity and it hurt the economic growth of our region. But responding to that problem also leads to schemes to increase efficiency, which in the long run is a good thing.
Now, let's talk about the Ohio economy for a second. I'm going to give you a few facts, and then I'm going to ask you a question. Unemployment rate in November, 5%. Job growth in the state, the best since the 1990s. Manufacturing, making a comeback in Ohio. On the other side, we need still almost 100,000 jobs to get back to where we were before the recession started. And that's been 5 years ago. Our labor force has shrunk by 200,000 workers. Population growth outside of Central Ohio is either stagnant or falling. Is our cup half empty or half full?
Yes. I actually, every other month, write an article for Hannah News Service, thank you, Steve, on some aspect of the Ohio economy. And so I get a very close look every other month of what's going on statewide. And there are a couple things in the Ohio economy that really kind of concern me. And the first of these is the population growth. Population growth is very, very small. If you pull Central Ohio out, which is growing by about 1.1% per year, the rest of Ohio is actually shrinking. And the problem with that gets back to what I was saying earlier about jobs that support local people. If the local population isn't growing, those jobs can't grow. And so that puts a cap on a huge swath of the Ohio economy. The other problem that I noticed in doing one of my articles the other month, actually, was manufacturing productivity. Now, the story that I've always given you is that the manufacturing sector sheds workers because it's increasing its output per worker. The efficiency of workers is increasing. That's going on nationally. Even though we're seeing increasing employment, it is going on to a much lesser extent in Ohio. And so that might wind up causing Ohio manufacturing employment to stall.
Something to watch for.
So I'm worried about that. But certainly we're better off than we were in the last decade. The last decade was really a lost decade for Ohio because we're down about 100,000 jobs from where we were in December, actually in mid-07, because we started falling before the nation started falling. But we were at that point we were down more than 200,000 jobs from mid-2000. So we don't have 100,000 jobs to make up. We have 300,000 jobs to make up. And so we're certainly doing better, and I sure hope it continues.
Yeah. I'm going to cover one more thought with Bill, and then we'll start taking questions from the audience. So I guess we can queue up over here at the microphone. The economy finally, at long last, seems to be finally getting into gear. We've had such modest, slow growth coming out of the economy, out of the recession. It seemed like it was never going to get better. But now we've gotten some really good job growth, a couple 100,000 jobs a month, best since the 1990s. Consumer confidence, as you mentioned, up at an 8-year high. Obviously, we've got a long way to go before we are finally healed. But what do you think has finally happened in the past couple of quarters to seemingly kick the economy into gear?
I think it was just a healing process. And as I said, the economy really does look strong across the board. It's not just being propped up by one or two sectors. It's pretty much all sectors are doing well. One big concern that I didn't talk about, though, was housing. Housing doesn't seem to have really come back, and to some extent, the situation that we had before the recession was just crazy. And we're not going to get back there. But when you look at the demand for housing, it's just not as solid as one would expect. People are not buying houses the way they were. People are renting a whole lot more. And a big question that I've been asking myself over the last few years is whether that's temporary or permanent, whether the recession and the collapse in the housing market was so traumatic that people have gotten scared of investing in housing and are going off and investing in other things instead.
Well, certainly we've seen household formation be pretty weak. Lots of kids, I'm guessing one or two in this room, lots of kids staying in basements and in their old bedrooms from when they were kids and that kind of thing. And so, and people don't want to sell their house.
Right.
I mean, the number of homes for sale in Central Ohio continues to be very low. And I think part of it is they've locked into that interest rate that's so incredibly low that it's just easy just to stay with that and maybe not take a risk or a gamble that it could be that they could lose out on something.
Yeah, there was a lot of work in the mid and late 80s in the academic real estate literature that I was studying at the time that talked about what was called mortgage lock. And unless you've got an assumable mortgage, we're going to see that again.
Yeah.
We probably are already to some extent.
Okay, it's, of course, the CMC's tradition to take audience questions. Please state your name and ask your question. And, of course, we thank you in advance for avoiding any long editorial comments.
Well, Mark, you're not going to be able to avoid one thing. My name's Ryan Schick. I'm the City of Columbus's small business concierge. There is a fantastic amount of entrepreneurism right now that is occurring in basements that I'm seeing every single day. So we might want to bring that back above ground because that might not be such a bad thing in a couple of years. But I say that in jest.
we actually were going to talk about small business formation, but we just really kind of just ran out of time.
Well, great. Actually,
you want to ask me a question on small business formation?
As a matter of fact, yes, I do, Bill. Over one of our many hyper-caffeinated conversations, you and I have had the very first word I asked you what Columbus needed was you replied locally serviced retail. Now we have a lot of civic, financial leaders, other individuals in this room right now who would be a big interest to your answer. How would you continue to elaborate on that? And since we had that very first meeting, how has that grown in your opinion?
Well, I am very encouraged. I really am. If you were here last year, I gave you some pretty frightening numbers on business formation in Central Ohio. And my hope in doing that was to start conversations around the need to encourage entrepreneurs and bring up the idea that venture capital and tech entrepreneurship is necessary but by no means sufficient. And while I don't have new numbers, I'm certainly aware that this is a long-standing problem, that it's going to take a long time to solve, but I am extremely, extremely encouraged by you getting hired, by just the conversations over the last year that I've been a part of that talk about, well, how can we juice up this number? How can we encourage people to start businesses? And so, as I said last year, I'll say it again, this is a problem. It continues to be a problem. We have solved many problems in this town in the past. We can solve this one too.
Mark Barbash from Finance Fund. As always, a great look at the future. I want to ask a little bit about millennials, and we're seeing a lot of kind of anecdotal commentary about depressed wage levels, the inability to get a mortgage, the inability to find a job, and the impact that that's having on the millennials, on whom we're all placing a lot of hope that the next generation is coming forward. And as well as the kind of the burden of college loan funds and things like that. I'm wondering if you've looked at that and if you have both some thoughts on what you see as well as thoughts on what we ought to be doing to encourage the millennial generation to keep getting more engaged in the community.
Well, that is a really great question. The problem with millennials is, I think, going back to the problem that I highlighted earlier with wages in general not rising. And so you have people who've gone through college, have tens of thousands of dollars in college debt. What I always say is it's like walking across the stage at commencement, getting handed the keys to a new Lexus that you have to pay for, and being told, oh, by the way, we've just driven it off a cliff. And so that really is a problem, and it weighs down the ability of these folks to save and to spend. I'm not sure how you solve that problem for those millennials who haven't gone to college. Certainly the training needs to be relevant. It needs to be affordable, accessible, and it needs to include the expectation that, by golly, if your shift starts at 9 a.m., you will be here at 9 a.m., and you will not be here in a cartoon character T-shirt, which really is also very important. So it's helping these folks get a job. I don't, again, the college debt problem is huge, and I don't have an answer for that one.
Yeah, I did a story with a millennial actually last spring covering some of this issue. And it's interesting because millennials, and there's several in the audience, I can see them, millennials look at work differently than prior generations. And they see work not the same way that we see it. Millennials are much slower to get into the workforce. A lot of high school kids think it's important for them to do service work and volunteer work to bolster their resume to get into the college that they want. And then they spend their summers in college doing different things. And so they may come out of college, they could be 23, 24 years old, and they may never have held a job at all, nothing. And so we pick up soft skills, I think, at our first job. You know, the job that you work, that's your minimum wage job, that teaches you all the really, the things that no one ever teaches you in class. And so you pick those up kind of like naturally. Mm-hmm. And then you don't ever, but if you've never worked, and then now you're in the workforce for the first time in your mid-20s, and that first job is going to be a lot more pressure than somebody had in high school, there's kind of a disconnect. And so I just think it takes a while to kind of figure all that out. This group will do it. They will do it. This group will be just like all the other prior generations, I believe. It's just different. The other problem that I think we're seeing is that because of how tough the recession was on people, you had people who were getting laid off from jobs that they had for a long, long time. And then they are being pushed down to taking jobs that would have gone to young people in the past. Mm-hmm. And so that's tough. That is really tough. And so hopefully now that the economy is kicking in gear, we're getting a lot more jobs added, some of this will get better.
On the soft skills, I want to give a quick shout out to a program at Columbus State called the 21st Century Skills Program. It was developed there, financed by the Ohio Board of Regents. And what it does is for 13 weeks, it takes you through a program where they teach you how to behave on a job, how to develop a resume, how to interview, how to interact with people in a teamwork setting, how to turn on a computer and run it a little bit. And so you come out of that program with a much better sense of the expectations of a job than you would have had otherwise. It's a great program. Regents are, from what I understand, spreading that out to public colleges and universities throughout the state, and I'm really excited to see that.
Okay.
Marie.
Hi, I'm Marie Trudeau with W.E. Davis Insurance. Bill, thank you again for taking all of this and bringing it down into a context that I can understand. My question is kind of three-tiered, and it has to do with the health care. You say there's growth in health care. Do you attribute that to the larger number of insureds due to Obamacare? Secondly, once the Republicans get in, do you think they'll be able to actually dismantle Obamacare? And if so, is that going to then lower the growth in that area as we get people out there uninsured again, if it can come to that?
I think the growth in healthcare is really a function, at least around here, I think it's a function of the expansion of all four of the hospital systems. That's been a much larger factor in the growth of healthcare employment over the last half dozen years than it was before. Prior to all this, the big game in town was outpatient care, home care, which is certainly still very big, but you've got this hospital expansion adding to it too. As far as whether the Republicans will be able to dismantle Obamacare, I have no earthly clue. Because I follow politics, but politics are not my thing. So who knows? Stay tuned.
Yeah.
I'm Amy Claiborne, president of Homeport. Thank you very much for a very interesting program. Mark, you asked the question, is there something more we should be doing? There's an increase in the number of jobs, for example, the home health workers, other kind of health workers, and these are jobs that don't pay a living wage. And our economy seems to need a lot of people who are working in very low-paying jobs. So whether some people get more educated and get better jobs, that's great, but the economy still requires just a lot of jobs in retail, fast food restaurants, other places that are not a living wage. So either we need to increase the wages or provide the supports so people have an affordable place to live. And Bill, you mentioned that construction is not increasing for homes. Rents are going up. So do you have any thoughts on what the solutions are so that everyone in our community has a decent place to live?
She asked you the question.
Yeah. Yikes. That's all I got to say to that.
Either of you can answer.
I'm not sure. I just don't have much help on this one.
Well,
because she's right, though.
she is very right, completely right. Ultimately, wages are driven by productivity and the value of your output. And so we could say that we will pay people a minimum of $15 an hour, which would get them at least in the ballpark of a living wage. The problem with that is that there are a lot of jobs that just don't generate $15 worth. And if you say that no job shall pay less than $15, those jobs go away. On the other hand, increasing low-income individuals' wages makes them spend that money because lower-wage people spend most of what they earn. And so that helps the economy. But the fact remains that these folks still aren't generating $15 worth of output. And oh, by the way, the scuttlebutt has always been that a low cost of living is what causes low wages, and it's actually just the opposite. It's productivity that causes low wages, which in turn causes a lower cost of living. And so if you start trumpeting the fact that wages in Central Ohio are lower than average, that's not necessarily a good thing.
Hi, Jim Coe from WCBE NPR. Piggybacking on the earlier question about the birthing and development of locally owned entrepreneurial businesses, Bill, well, I don't want to not consider Mark, but either
It's
of you
okay.
project, if you will, how much more enhanced your report today would be if we were stronger in the growth of locally owned businesses?
I can't give you a specific number on that. I can tell you that definitely our job growth would be better, because the value of locally owned, locally serving businesses is that they trap money in the local economy that would otherwise go out to other places. And so as a result, people are better off. And so that's, I can certainly tell you that job growth would be stronger. Maybe, who knows, maybe another 5,000, 6,000 jobs perhaps. But that's why this is so important.
We have time for one more question, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Hi, Dr. Lafayette. First, I wanted to thank you for a very informative and insightful talk today.
Thank you.
If I could, I wanted to preface my question with just maybe a few facts or things to address the economy. Between 2007 and 2013, American households roughly have lost 40% of their wealth. Wages are still well below pre-recession levels, and we have the smallest labor force since the late 70s. Can you give a reason or maybe just a theory as to why wages are so stagnant and maybe why they're not growing with employment? Because generally in economic models you'll see as unemployment goes down, wages will also start to come up. Mm-hmm. But we're seeing unemployment go down, at least the percentage, but wages are also not going up. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to see if you had an answer.
Well, what we're seeing, what we have seen, is just the taking up of a huge amount of economic slack. And so as people start to get hired, that slack starts to diminish. Now, we don't really know how much slack there is left in the economy, because there's a debate right now. Is the declining labor force, which you referred to, is that a result of changes in demographics or the result of people who have become discouraged and will at some point come back in? If it's the latter, then there's a lot more slack still than would be the case if it's the former. The Atlanta Fed, and to some degree the Cleveland Fed's been doing a lot of work on that, and they tend to think that it's more demographics than not, which means that we really are taking up the slack. Mark was talking earlier about some anecdotal stuff that he saw during holiday hiring. Go ahead.
Well, so these are for all the seasonal jobs that we have so much around here, and the hiring managers I was talking to, there's enough tightening now in the market around here that jobs from this Christmas were paying $1 or $2 more an hour than prior Christmases because of the need for workers and how much tougher it is to find workers now. We've heard it. We were starting to see some data that raises are starting to come back. We don't know enough yet. Just some indication of it. It's still a long ways to go. You're right. If you look at all the household income data, we're like even below 2,000 still on an inflation-adjusted level, and so I think this is going to be to me the year to kind of watch that. If we continue to get 250,000 jobs a month being generated, and we had a good employment number today. If we continue to have that, and these markets start to tighten more, then hopefully workers will get more of the piece of the pie.
Thank you. Wow, I hope you enjoyed today's forum. I want the record to reflect that I got to preside over a cheery forecast and that I did not wear my cartoon character T-shirt today. I made the right choice on that this morning. Remember that you can view and share all of our forums on CTV, Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio Channel and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Once more, thanks to our sponsors, Fifth Third Bank, BDO, and the Columbus Dispatch, and our good friends at Leadership Columbus. And thanks again to our speakers, Bill Lafayette and Mark Williams. Thank you all for being here.